Today's format is slightly different from the last 2 days. We'll have brief presentations by Cluster, Omar Nariati, and Beth Stryker, and then by Superpool as well. And then we'll open it up into more of a workshop format for about 2 hours. I think the whole session will be about 2 hours from now. We want to wrap up. We want to wrap up by noon. You have the bios in your program, so I won't read them in detail. But to maximize time, I'll just let them start right away. So, Cluster.
Well, thank you for hanging on for the third day. It's been a long process. I think the purpose of today, the first day we listened to these wonderful experiences from other cities, and yesterday we tried to give back and try to introduce Cairo to everybody. And I think today is trying to bring the two perspectives together. So what we'll do, Beth and I will present some research we've been working on in the past year, and hopefully with the Superpool's presentation we'll try to look at commonality and the question of transferability. So should we turn the light off, or is it? All right. We have been interested in the question of informality and formal urbanism for years, and specifically the question of formalization of public space. And what has been really interesting in the last 2 years is some of these practices on the ground have taken new shape and new meaning in terms of the magnitude and the intensity, but also in terms of new modes of practices that are, I argue, qualitatively different. So one of the main observations that I'm going to start introducing before I talk about the specific research is that, as we mentioned the first day, that we really see Cairo revolution as an urban revolution, and that means many of the manifestations of that are happening on the street and public space. So we've been really interested in trying to capture this moment of flux, the moment that is changing so fast in terms of political landscape and urban landscape. People are taking advantage of this political vacuum and really maximizing their gain. And we identified two issues that we'll talk about today. The one is our changes on the ground, like walls and barricades and graffiti and street vendors and so on, but also the new sense of subjectivity or attitude, individual and community towards authority. They feel more empowered and emboldened, but also their attitude, the city and public space. So the first question we're asking, why do we map? So that question was raised the first day. The question of informality has to do with, social injustice and divided geography and accessibility, and we talked about that. But the point is, the mapping has always been, monopolized or it is a monopoly of the state. And in many ways, the mapping of informality has been very exclusive and almost editing out anything outside a formal city. But also has to do with perception of middle class to informality has been very, very distorted, and I would say limited to a very distant experience, basically driving on a ring road, seeing it from a distance. So that also, needs a little bit of, we need to change the perspective of the main narrative, basically. Now, when the revolution started, we've seen that people are remapping their geography. They're reconstituting the meaning of the streets and spaces and reimagining the city in ways that were, I think, remapping the city, not based on planners' perspective of streets and nodes, but based on meeting points of rallies. So the city is now reimagined, reconstituted, remapped from a revolutionary perspective. Even on a more abstract level and dramatic level, the city is now reduced or abstracted or reimagined to reflect the significance of the meeting points as the framework to imagine and map the city. So we recognize that, and we've been working with other projects, which we're not going to talk about today, but just a glimpse. We've been part of a process to map from below, if you will, a project called OpenStreetMap. We're working with informal communities with a software to allow them to map their own what they see is significant and relevant in the neighborhood, from pharmacies to coffee shops to tuk-tuk and microbus stops. And that project is ongoing, and we did a pilot in Ardeloa, and that's something we're interested in doing. But today we want to talk about other projects, which is what we call it archiving the city in flux. We also made some interviews. I'm going to show you a glimpse of that.
فاكرك بس تلم شويه. انا دلوقتي راجل في الشارع، بيتي مكون من 4 اسر وانا وزوجتي 5، واخد بالك؟ لما انا صايع او بلطجي او مافياجي او عصابجي هاجي اقف في الشارع ليه؟ هاجي اقف في الشارع ليه؟ هاجي ادور على لقمه العيش بالحلال ليه؟ المحل الوحيد عشان نمشي في الشارع والنصيب ان هم انا لو خربت دي ماليش شغل تاني، فانا بالتالي لازم مع الزبون يبقى لساني حلو، مع صاحب المحل لساني حلو، هو واقف باحترامي بادبي نظيف، واخد بال حضرتك؟ تاخدني من الجنه توديني النار. ما بصرتش بقى من الشارع، دي اكل عيش مفيش اي حد تاني. اللي بقى اللي اتكلم فيه لما انت تيجي تجيب اكل عيش هتروح ايه؟
Sorry about the music, it's a bit... Okay. And then very recently we started working with some advocacy groups at AIPR to develop a sort of a multi-stakeholder approach to street vendors. So we're not only dealing with street vendors, but also we're bringing to the table shop owner, residents, anti-harassment groups, car drivers, traffic police, municipality, and urban harmony folks, so that we can find a way as a middle ground to use street vendors and the contestation of public space and the meaning of public space as a microcosm of the larger battles that are taking place of society. So we're using like very conventional techniques like building models and working with them, and we're in a very early stage of proposing like a pilot, like a street section, to try to accommodate some of these issues. The second very important examples that I want to show you is the example of roadside development. What I said, the encroachment on highways, and that has been also something that we need to look at the roots of this and the causes of this issue. Yesterday, some of you were us in the 2 informal areas, and the ring road was built for one reason was to divert traffic, of course, but the other reason is to contain and limit the further encroachment of agricultural land. So it's more of a political tool. And what it didn't do is to give access, to lend accessibility to the communities around it. So in many cases, some of them are very stark. Your building or your window almost touches the highway, but you don't have access to it. So what happens is this sense of exclusion and marginality was translated into people trying to find a resourceful way to gain access by building steps and small ramps. And that to us became very interesting more because we started to document what happened on the highway and what are the intervals, what are the distances, is there a pattern that we can document. So what we did is we used, I'll show you just a glimpse of it, Google Map as we start to drive and sort of GPS the location of every step, every bus, microbus stop, car repair shop, ramp, and so on and so forth. And that to us is just at the early stage of documentation that we hope in the next stage will be able to use this information to try to develop pattern and see what the relationship between the location of the steps or microbuses and the communities behind it, whether it's a street or a bridge and so on and so forth. Almost done. So basically we started to put it in a sort of conventional, unfold it into very linear and put all these patterns. And the last thing I want to show you is one of the stark examples that I showed in other presentation, but many of you haven't seen it, which is one of the very, very strong example of this infrastructure adjustment by local communities by building an informal exit called Matamidei exit. And that's the location here, the white, the 2 circles are the junction with 26th of July corridor and the bottom one is Soft 11, and this is the one that you used to what used to look like that. So early on they built a dirt ramp, and then at the peak of the revolution, the first few months, they took the advantage of the political vacuum and they mobilized and they constructed a ramp, 2 up ramps and 2 down ramps. And what's fascinating about it is the process, not only the mobilizing process and the technical know-how and the coordination, but also the relationship to the authority, because once they build it, they they thought that this initial moment of opening, they call it infaraga, is not going to last forever. So they thought long term, and they made this incredible documentation, send it to the governor of Giza and the police chief, and invited them to come and inaugurate, like cut the ribbon basically. So the governor came actually, and they not only formalize it, but they put a police station underneath. So that's a very interesting process of formalizing the informal free law. I'm just going to show you one last thing, and then I'm going to hand over to Beth. That's part of the edited version of the film. That's the community did this PowerPoint, and I would like also to know the kind of soundtrack, because part of the
So we started with about 30 to 40 different urban architecture, also art, culture, advocacy groups, and preliminary meeting was also people who are focusing specifically on public space to begin to talk about how can we share resources and collaborate, also knowing that at some point some of this funding will also dry up and there's going to be a need for people to actually collaborate and do things together. So this is just some documentation of the first session, and one of the things that became clear very early on is that we actually needed to help create some tools for people to visualize what was happening in the city, and tools for them to actually be able to communicate, share resources, and also broadcast their activities. So we proposed building a shared directory and calendar to document all of these new initiatives in the city, which we're now calling the Cairo Urban Initiatives Platform. This is from the second meeting that we convened back in December. This one we also divided it between presenting the wireframe for this directory and calendar so that we could get people's input and make sure that it was a tool for self-representation, that people felt that it was something that they could use to present what they were doing and also to keep track of what other folks were doing. And this is an overview of the different tools that we're developing right now. So one is the QUIP directory, the shared calendar. We're also developing CURL, which is a Cairo Urban Resource Library, which is basically an urban architecture library that we're hosting at Cluster, but we're also building an online cataloging system that allows us to catalog different architecture and urban collections throughout the city. So it's sort of a distributed library, and it's in Arabic and in English. So this is, again, another way of just being able to visualize what resources are available and help people get access to them. And I'm just going to show you really quickly. And this is now live, so we can also give you the URL if you're interested so that you can look at this later more on your own. But this is the shared calendar and directory.
It's not working. Here, maybe? I don't know.
We need to figure out how to switch over to this computer first.
The one with upload.
There we go. So we had done all this research in our office, and again, reaching out to all of these initiatives to just try and gather information. There was no single place where you could go to visualize what was happening in terms of the architecture, the art scene. So here you can see we've color-coded the different types of initiatives. You can sort through this directory by name, by type. You can sort of get an overview of what's happening, for example, in art and culture in the city. And you can also see we've integrated the directory and the calendar so that you can see what's happening at any moment. And we're also creating an archive so you can see what may have happened in the past. I mean, part of what we are interested in is mapping how this activity is changing over time. So this is just to give you a feel for how the directory functions, events. And we've been developing this. We just did a beta launch about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, and so this is still in development, and we brought everybody into our office for an open house just to help create logins, introduce them to the system. The intention is that this is going to be managed by the initiatives themselves, and they will have direct access to it. So you can search by day, and I'm going to skip the curl interface for now, but I can give out we have cards also upstairs at the third floor, and we also will be presenting this in a computer in the lobby of Oriental Hall from 4 to 6 today, and some of our people from our office will be there if people want to get more of an in-depth view of what's happening with the system, and if you want to log in or join the platform, that's also something that we're hoping to start doing outreach now that this has been launched. So that's my 5-minute overview of QUIP.
Thank you.